My son kicked me out of a hotel in Dubai. I was left penniless. Until a billionaire sheikh recognized me. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Gretchen, and at 66 years old, I never imagined I'd find myself sleeping on the streets of a foreign country, abandoned by my own son. The morning started like any other day of our Dubai vacation. Quincy had insisted on this trip, saying his mother deserved to see the world after all the sacrifices I'd made raising him alone. His wife Eleni had been surprisingly supportive, even helping plan the itinerary. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a real family. I should have known better. We were staying at the Burj Al Arab, one of the most expensive hotels in the world. Quincy had insisted on paying for everything, waving away my concerns about the cost. "Mom, you worked 3 jobs to put me through college. Let me spoil you for once," he'd said, that charming smile of his melting away my worries. That morning, I woke up feeling dizzy. The heat, the rich food, the excitement of the trip had caught up with me. I mentioned feeling unwell during breakfast, and Eleni immediately suggested I rest while they went shopping. "We'll bring you back something beautiful," she said, her Greek accent making the words sound almost musical. "You stay here and relax by the pool." I handed over my credit card without hesitation. "Get yourselves something nice too," I said, kissing Quincy's forehead the way I had when he was a little boy. By afternoon, I was feeling better and decided to join them. But when I went to the front desk to ask about their whereabouts, the clerk's expression grew uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your son and his wife checked out this morning. They said you'd already left." My heart stopped. "That's impossible. I've been here all day." The clerk showed me the checkout receipt. Quincy had charged nearly $8,000 to my credit card before leaving. Room service, spa treatments, shopping excursions, everything. "Where are my belongings?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They took all the luggage, ma'am. They said you were meeting them at the airport." I stood there in the marble lobby, wearing nothing but the light sundress I'd put on that morning, feeling the world spin around me. No passport, no phone, no wallet, nothing. "There must be some mistake," I kept repeating, even as the horrible truth settled in my chest like a stone. The hotel manager was kind but firm. Without a credit card or identification, I couldn't stay another night. The card Quincy had used was maxed out, and when they tried to process an additional charge for my extended stay, it was declined. "Perhaps you could call your family," the manager suggested gently, but how could I call anyone when I didn't even have a phone? And the only family I had just abandoned me in a country 9,000 miles from home. As evening fell, I found myself walking the streets of downtown Dubai, my summer dress providing little protection against the desert wind. The contrast was surreal. Around me, gleaming skyscrapers reached toward the heavens, luxury cars glided past, and well-dressed tourists laughed and chatted. Meanwhile, I was becoming one of the invisible people, the forgotten ones who slipped through the cracks of this golden city. I'd never felt so alone in my life, not even when Quincy's father walked out on us when Quincy was 3, leaving us with nothing but debt and broken promises. At least then, I had my baby to fight for. Now, that same baby had thrown me away like garbage. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 33 years sacrificing everything for Quincy. I worked double shifts as a nurse, skipped meals so he could eat, wore the same clothes for years so he could have new ones. I turned down dates, opportunities, even a marriage proposal from a wonderful man named Harold, because I thought Quincy needed me. And this is how he repaid me. As the hours passed, hunger gnawed at my stomach. I hadn't eaten since that morning breakfast, and my legs were growing weak. I found a small bench near a bus stop and sat down, trying to think of what to do next. A few kind strangers offered help when they saw an elderly woman sitting alone, but the language barrier made communication difficult. How do you explain to someone that your own son stole your credit card and abandoned you? How do you admit that level of betrayal without breaking down completely? Night fell over Dubai like a curtain, and with it came a chill that seeped into my bones. The bench was hard and cold, and every time I started to doze, the sound of traffic or the murmur of late-night pedestrians would jolt me awake. I kept thinking about Quincy as a little boy, how he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering, "I love you, Mama," against my shoulder. Where had I gone wrong? How had that sweet child grown into a man capable of such cruelty? By morning, I was exhausted, hungry, and beginning to feel the first sharp edges of despair. My hair was a mess, my dress wrinkled and dirty. I caught my reflection in a shop window and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. That's when I saw him. He was tall and elegantly dressed, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to look right through me. Something about his presence made me sit up straighter, though I couldn't understand why. He approached slowly, as if he didn't want to startle me, and when he spoke, his voice carried an accent that was both foreign and somehow familiar. "Excuse me," he said gently, "but are you all right?" I wanted to say yes, to maintain some shred of dignity. Instead, tears started flowing down my cheeks, and I found myself telling this stranger everything. About Quincy, about the betrayal, about spending the night on a bench in a foreign country with no way home. He listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned with each word. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "It's always good to meet an old love again, Gretchen." I stared at this stranger, my heart hammering against my ribs. How did he know my name? The way he said "old love" sent chills down my spine. But I couldn't place his face, couldn't remember ever meeting him before. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "Do we know each other?" A sad smile crossed his features. "You don't remember me. I suppose that's not surprising. It was 40 years ago, and I've changed considerably since then." 40 years ago. I tried to think back to 1984, when I was 26 and Quincy was just a toddler. Those were dark years, filled with struggles I'd tried hard to forget. Working night shifts at the hospital, barely making ends meet, raising a child alone. "My name is Rashid," he said softly. "Dr. Rashid Al-Mansouri." Though when we knew each other, I was just a medical student struggling with English and homesick for the desert. The name hit me like a physical blow. Rashid, sweet, gentle Rashid, who used to sit in the hospital cafeteria during his rotation, looking lost and overwhelmed. We'd started talking one evening when I found him crying over his textbooks, frustrated by the language barrier and missing his family back home. "Oh my God," I whispered, my hand flying to my mouth. "Rashid? But you look so different?" He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. 40 years of desert sun and responsibility will do that to a man. Plus, I was quite thin back then, wasn't I? All elbows and anxiety. I remembered now. He'd been skinny, almost fragile-looking, with thick glasses and a shy smile. This man before me was broad-shouldered and confident, his glasses replaced by keen brown eyes that had seen the world. But when he smiled, just for a moment, I could see the young student I'd once known. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still trying to process this impossible coincidence. "I live here now, have for the past 30 years. I returned to Dubai after finishing my residency in America, and I've been blessed beyond measure." He gestured toward a sleek black car parked nearby, where a driver waited patiently. "I've built several hospitals, invested in businesses. Allah has been generous." My mind reeled. The sweet, struggling student I'd known had become... What? Wealthy? Powerful? The way he carried himself, the expensive clothes, the driver, all suggested success beyond anything I could have imagined. "But you," he said, his expression growing concerned again. "What brought you to Dubai? And why are you?" He trailed off delicately, not wanting to voice what we both knew, that I looked like a homeless woman sitting on a bench. I told him everything again, about Quincy's betrayal, about being stranded without identification or money. With each word, his expression grew darker. "Your own son did this to you?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. After everything you sacrificed for him, after the way you... He stopped himself, shaking his head. I'm sorry. It's not my place to judge your family. What were you going to say? I asked. After the way I what? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. You were working 3 jobs when I knew you. Always exhausted, always worried about money. I used to watch you in the cafeteria, falling asleep over your coffee during your breaks. You had this little boy, very young, and you were doing everything alone. The memories came flooding back. Those awful months when Quincy's father had just left, when I was struggling to keep us afloat. Rashid had been there during some of the darkest times of my life, though I'd been too proud and too overwhelmed to let anyone get too close. I remember you bought me coffee once, I said softly, when my paycheck was late and I hadn't eaten all day. You said it was because I'd helped you with your English, but really, I was falling in love with you, he finished quietly. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Falling in love? We'd been friends, study partners, 2 people thrown together by circumstance, hadn't we? Rashid, Please, he said, holding up a hand. Let me help you first. We can talk about the past later, but right now, you need food, rest, and clean clothes. My driver will take us to my home where you can shower and eat properly. Then we'll figure out how to get you back to America. Part of me wanted to refuse. I'd spent so many years being independent, taking care of myself and everyone else. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But I was exhausted, hungry, and stranded 9,000 miles from home. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. Okay, I said quietly. Thank you. He helped me to my feet with a gentleness that brought tears to my eyes. When was the last time someone had treated me with such care? Certainly not my own son. The ride to his home was surreal. The car was luxurious beyond anything I'd ever experienced, with leather seats that felt like clouds and air conditioning that gradually warmed my chilled bones. Rashid sat beside me, asking gentle questions about my life, my work, my health. He was still the kind, attentive man I remembered, but there was a new confidence about him, a sense of power that hadn't been there before. You never married? He asked at one point. I shook my head. Came close a few times, but I shrugged. Quincy always came first. He needed stability, and I thought bringing another man into our lives would complicate things. Something flickered across Rashid's face, but he didn't comment. As we pulled through ornate gates and up a winding driveway, my breath caught in my throat. His home was a palace, all white marble and graceful arches, with fountains and gardens that looked like something from a fairy tale. This wasn't just wealth, this was royalty. Rashid, I said slowly, what exactly do you do now? He smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the shy student I'd once known. I'm what you might call a sheikh, though the title means less than it used to. What matters is that I have the resources to help you, and more importantly, I want to. As we stepped out of the car, servants appeared to assist us. They treated me with the same respect they showed Rashid, despite my disheveled appearance. He spoke to them in rapid Arabic, and within moments, a woman was leading me toward what she indicated was my room. Rest, Rashid said gently. Eat. Tomorrow we'll begin making arrangements for your return home. And Gretchen? He paused, his eyes holding mine. I'm glad fate brought you back to me, even under these circumstances. As I followed the servant through marble hallways lined with priceless art, my mind spun with questions. What did he mean? Brought me back to him? And why did I have the feeling that my encounter with Rashid was about to change everything? I woke up in a bed softer than clouds, surrounded by silk curtains and the gentle sound of fountains outside my window. For a moment, I forgot where I was, forgot everything that had happened. Then reality crashed back, and with it, the memory of Rashid's words from the night before. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called, pulling the luxurious robe tighter around myself. A young woman entered carrying a tray of tea and pastries. She smiled warmly and set the tray on the small table by the window. Mr. Rashid asks if you would join him in the garden when you're ready, she said in accented English. There is no rush. After she left, I stood at the window looking out at the most beautiful garden I'd ever seen. Palm trees swayed in the morning breeze, and colorful flowers bloomed around sparkling pools. It was like stepping into a dream, except the ache in my chest reminded me this wasn't a fairy tale. I'd spent the night thinking about Rashid, trying to piece together memories from 40 years ago. We'd known each other for about 6 months during his rotation at the hospital where I worked. He'd been so young, so far from home, struggling with his studies and the English language. I'd helped him with his medical terminology, and he'd helped me with. What? At the time, I thought it was just friendship. But looking back now, I could see the signs I'd been too overwhelmed to notice then. The way he'd light up when he saw me in the cafeteria. How he'd always save me a seat. The little gifts he'd bring, a flower from the hospital garden, a candy bar when he noticed I'd skipped lunch again, the way he'd look at me when he thought I wasn't watching. I'd been so focused on survival, on taking care of Quincy and keeping our heads above water that I'd missed what was right in front of me. After bathing and dressing in the beautiful clothes that had mysteriously appeared in my size, I made my way to the garden. Rashid was sitting at a small table under a pergola covered in flowering vines. He stood when he saw me, and I was struck again by how different he looked from the young man I'd known. "You look rested," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," I admitted. "Rashid, this is all so incredible. Your home, your everything. I can hardly believe it's real." He poured tea from an ornate silver service. "It is real, though I sometimes have trouble believing it myself. When I left Chicago in 1985, I had nothing but my medical degree and a broken heart." My hand froze halfway to my teacup. A broken heart? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his tea as if it held answers to questions I didn't even know to ask. "I was in love with you, Gretchen. Completely, utterly in love. I had been from almost the moment we met." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Rashid, I had no idea." "I know you didn't. You were dealing with so much, and I was just a foreign student with nothing to offer. How could I tell you I loved you when you were working yourself to exhaustion just to survive? What could I give you? I was living on student loans and eating ramen noodles for dinner." I set down my teacup with trembling hands. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I tried to once. Do you remember the night before my rotation ended? We were in the cafeteria, and you were telling me about your plans, how you wanted to eventually become a nurse practitioner. You looked so tired, so worn down by everything you were carrying alone." The memory came flooding back. It had been late, probably around midnight. We'd been studying together, or rather, I'd been helping him prepare for his final exam while I reviewed charts for my own patients. He'd seemed nervous that night, fidgety in a way that wasn't like him. "You started to say something," I said slowly. "But then my pager went off. There was an emergency in pediatrics. A little girl with asthma," he said softly. "You ran off to help, and by the time you came back, I'd lost my nerve. The next morning I was gone. You just disappeared. I went to find you to say goodbye, but they said you'd already left. I always wondered what happened to you." He reached across the table and gently took my hand. His skin was warm, and I could feel calluses that spoke of work despite his obvious wealth. "I couldn't say goodbye to you properly. I knew if I looked into your eyes one more time, I wouldn't have been able to leave. And I had to leave. My family expected me to return home, to fulfill my obligations here." "What obligations?" "My father owned several businesses, including a small hospital. I was his only son, and it was my duty to take over. I came back to Dubai and threw myself into work, trying to forget you, but I never could." I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. "You thought about me all these years?" "Every day." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of my hand. "I built the first hospital in your honor, though no one knew it. I named the pediatric wing after you, Gretchen's Garden, though I told everyone it was named after my grandmother. Every time I walked through those halls, I thought about how you would have loved working there, how your kindness would have touched so many children's lives." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "Rashid, I married once," he continued, his voice growing heavy. A woman my family chose for me. She was beautiful, well-educated, from a good family. I thought I could learn to love her, that it would be enough, but I couldn't give her my whole heart, because you still had it. She knew. After 3 years, she left me for a man who could love her the way she deserved. I'm so sorry. He shook his head. Don't be. She found happiness, and I learned that some hearts can only love one person completely. After that, I focused on my work, on building something meaningful. I expanded the hospital, opened 2 more, invested in medical research. I told myself it was enough. And now? He lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to my palm. Now I discover that the woman I never stopped loving has been struggling alone all these years, while her own son treats her like garbage. It breaks my heart, Gretchen. You deserved so much more. I pulled my hand free, suddenly overwhelmed. This is too much, Rashid. 40 years have passed. We're different people now. I'm 66 years old. My son hates me. I have nothing to offer you. You have everything to offer me, he said firmly. You're still the woman who worked 3 jobs to support her child. Still the woman who stayed late to help a struggling foreign student with his English. Still the woman who chose sacrifice over selfishness every single day. That's who you are, Gretchen. Not what your son did to you. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. It's my assistant. There's something urgent at the hospital. He looked up at me apologetically. I'm sorry. I need to take this call. We'll continue this conversation when I return? I nodded, needing time to process everything he'd told me. As he walked away, speaking rapidly in Arabic, I sat in the beautiful garden trying to make sense of my emotions. Here was a man who'd loved me for 40 years, who'd built an empire while thinking of me every day. Meanwhile, I'd spent those same 40 years sacrificing everything for a son who'd thrown me away the moment it became convenient. I thought about all the chances I'd missed because I was afraid to put myself first. Harold, the accountant who'd wanted to marry me when Quincy was 12. I'd turned him down because I thought it would confuse my son. David, the teacher who'd asked me out when Quincy was in college. I'd said no because I thought I needed to be available if my son needed me. How many opportunities for love and happiness had I given up for a child who would eventually abandon me on the streets of a foreign country? When Rashid returned 20 minutes later, his expression was troubled. I'm afraid I have some news about your son, he said carefully. My security team has been monitoring the situation, and it appears Quincy and his wife are still in Dubai. They're staying at a hotel downtown, and from what we can gather, they're having some difficulties. What kind of difficulties? The credit card they used was maxed out. They can't afford to stay much longer, and they don't have enough money for flights home. It seems your son's plan wasn't as well thought out as he believed. A cold satisfaction filled my chest. Good. Rashid raised an eyebrow at the hardness in my voice. There's more. They've been trying to contact the American embassy, claiming their mother is missing and they need help finding her. They seem quite desperate. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Now they want to find me. How convenient. What would you like me to do? Rashid asked quietly. I could have my people let them know you're safe, or what? Or we could let them worry a little longer while we decide what comes next. The choice is yours, Gretchen. For the first time in 40 years, you have all the power. 3 days passed like a dream. Rashid showed me his world, his hospitals, his charitable foundations, the medical schools he'd built. Everywhere we went, people treated him with deep respect, and by extension, they treated me like royalty. It was overwhelming and wonderful at the same time, but it was the quiet moments that meant the most. Our morning conversations over tea, the way he listened when I talked about my work as a nurse, how he remembered tiny details from 40 years ago. He told me about his mother, who'd passed away 5 years earlier, and how she'd always wondered why he never brought a woman home to meet her. I told her once that my heart lived in America, he said, as we walked through the pediatric wing of his newest hospital. She said that was the most romantic and most tragic thing she'd ever heard. On the 3rd evening, as we sat on his terrace watching the sunset paint the Dubai skyline in shades of gold and pink, Rashid grew quiet and serious. "I have something to ask you," he said, turning to face me. "And I want you to know there's no pressure, no expectation. If you say no, I'll arrange for your flight home tomorrow, and you'll never have to see me again." My heart started racing. "What is it?" He took my hands in his, and I could feel them trembling slightly. This powerful man, this sheikh who commanded respect from everyone around him, was nervous talking to me. "Stay here," he said simply. "Stay in Dubai. Stay with me." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I know it sounds crazy. I know we've only just found each other again after 40 years. But Gretchen, I never stopped loving you. I never stopped hoping that somehow, someday, fate would bring you back to me. Rashid, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, though I'd be honored if someday you'd consider it. I'm asking you to give us a chance. Give yourself a chance to be loved the way you deserve. You've spent your entire adult life taking care of everyone else. Let me take care of you for a while." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Stay another week, another month. Let me show you what life could be like here. You could work at the hospital if you wanted, though you'd never have to work again if you chose not to. You could travel, study, pursue all those dreams you put on hold, or you could simply rest and let someone else worry about everything for a change." Before I could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at it and sighed. "It's my head of security. I should take this." He stepped away to answer, and I heard him speaking in rapid Arabic, his tone growing increasingly sharp. When he returned, his expression was grim. "Your son is at the embassy again. This time he brought reporters with him. He's claiming you've been kidnapped by terrorists and demanding the American government intervene to find you." I felt my blood pressure spike. "He what?" "He's telling them his elderly mother disappeared from their hotel and he believes she's been taken by extremists. The story is gaining traction on social media. The hashtag #FindGretchen is trending." I stood up so fast I knocked over my teacup. "That manipulative little bastard." Rashid's eyebrows shot up at my language, but he didn't comment. "There's more. He set up a GoFundMe page asking for donations to help rescue you. He's already raised over $15,000. "Of course he has," I said bitterly. "Even my disappearance becomes a way for him to make money." "My security team says the embassy is starting to ask questions. Soon they'll want to involve local authorities. If this continues, it could become an international incident." I paced across the terrace, my mind racing. Quincy wasn't just trying to find me now. He was building a public narrative that painted him as the devoted son desperately searching for his missing mother. If I surfaced now, would anyone believe the truth? Or would they see an old woman who'd been brainwashed by her captors? "We need to end this before it goes any further," I said finally. "But I want to do it on my terms." "What do you have in mind?" I turned to look at him, this man who'd loved me faithfully for 40 years while I'd wasted my devotion on someone who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. "First, I want to see him. I want to look Quincy in the eye and tell him exactly what I think of him and his pathetic wife. And then," I paused, meeting Rashid's hopeful gaze, "and then I want to accept your proposal." His face lit up like the sunrise. "You mean it?" "I mean it. I've spent 66 years putting everyone else first. It's time I chose happiness for myself." He pulled me into his arms and kissed me, gentle and sweet, full of 40 years of longing. When we broke apart, I felt like a different woman. Not the exhausted nurse working herself to death, not the abandoned mother sleeping on park benches, but someone worthy of love and respect. "How do you want to handle your son?" Rashid asked. "Set up a meeting, somewhere public where he can't make a scene. And I want your security team there, recording everything. If he tries to spin this later, I want proof of what really happened." The next morning, Rashid's assistant called the embassy and arranged for Quincy and Eleni to meet with me at a neutral location, a conference room at one of Dubai's most prestigious hotels. They were told only that I was safe and wanted to speak with them. I spent an hour getting ready, with Rashid's stylists helping me look my absolute best. I wore a designer dress in deep blue, real jewelry, and professional makeup. I looked like what I was now, the beloved companion of one of Dubai's most influential men. When Quincy and Eleni walked into that conference room, their jaws dropped. They'd expected to find a broken old woman grateful to be rescued. Instead, they found someone who looked better than she had in years, sitting beside a man who radiated wealth and power. "Mom?" Quincy said uncertainly. "Are you okay? We've been so worried." "Have you?" I asked coolly. "Is that why you stole my credit card and left me stranded?" His face flushed. "That was a misunderstanding. We thought you were meeting us at the airport. When you didn't show up." "Stop lying, Quincy. We both know exactly what happened." Eleni stepped forward, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "Mrs. Patterson, you look different. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? Sometimes elderly people can become confused." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said, standing up. "Clear enough to see you both for what you really are." Quincy's eyes darted to Rashid, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Who is this man? Has he been keeping you here against your will?" Rashid spoke for the first time, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I am Sheikh Rashid al-Mansouri. Your mother is here as my honored guest, and she's free to leave anytime she chooses." I watched Quincy's face change as he processed the title sheikh and took in Rashid's obvious wealth and status. I could practically see the calculations running through his mind. "A sheikh?" Eleni whispered, her fake concern replaced by naked greed. "Mom, this is wonderful. Think of all the opportunities. The only opportunity here," I said firmly, "is for you both to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." I walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of my son, this man I'd sacrificed everything for, who'd repaid me with betrayal. "You stole from me, abandoned me, and then used my disappearance to scam money from strangers on the internet. You are not my son anymore, Quincy. You're nothing to me." His face went white. "Mom, you don't mean that. We can work this out. I know you're upset, but what? You'll pay me back? You'll promise to do better? How many times have I heard those words from you over the years?" I turned to Eleni, who was trying to edge closer to Rashid. "And you, stay away from my husband-to-be." The word husband hung in the air like a bomb. Quincy's mouth fell open, and Eleni made a strangled sound. "Husband?" Quincy repeated. "Mom, you can't be serious. You barely know this man. He could be taking advantage of you." I laughed, actually laughed. "Taking advantage of me? That's rich, coming from someone who literally stole my credit card and left me homeless." "This is different," he insisted. "You're not thinking straight. You're traumatized from what happened." "What happened," I said clearly, "is that I finally learned who my real family is. And it's not you." The silence in the conference room was deafening. Quincy stared at me as if I'd grown a second head, while Eleni's eyes darted between Rashid and me like a predator calculating her next move. "Mom, please," Quincy said, his voice taking on that wheedling tone I'd heard so many times before. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but don't make any hasty decisions. This man, this sheikh, he could be manipulating you. You're vulnerable right now." "Vulnerable?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "The only people who made me vulnerable were you and your wife when you stole my money and left me on the streets." Rashid placed a gentle hand on my arm, and I drew strength from his presence. For 40 years, this man had carried love for me in his heart. Meanwhile, the son I'd devoted my life to had been planning to rob and abandon me. "Perhaps we should discuss practical matters," Rashid said smoothly. "Your hotel bill, for instance. I understand you're having some financial difficulties." Quincy's face flushed red. "That's temporary. We're sorting it out." "With the $15,000 you crowdfunded from your Missing Mother campaign?" I asked. The color drained from his face. "How did you—" "I know everything, Quincy. Every lie you told, every dollar you stole, every sympathy donation you collected while I was sleeping on a bench wondering if I'd ever see home again." Eleni finally found her voice. "Look, we all made mistakes here, but we're family, and family forgives each other. Right, Mom?" She smiled that saccharine smile that had always made my skin crawl. "I'm sure we can put this behind us and move forward, especially now that you've found such a generous friend." The way she said generous made my stomach turn. Even now, even after everything, they were already calculating how to profit from my relationship with Rashid. "You're right about one thing," I said. "Family does forgive each other, but you're not my family anymore." "Don't say that," Quincy pleaded. "I'm your son. I made a mistake, but I'm still your son." "No," I said firmly. "My son wouldn't have left his mother homeless in a foreign country. My son wouldn't have stolen from the woman who worked 3 jobs to put him through college. My son wouldn't have exploited my disappearance for money while I was suffering." I walked over to where Rashid sat and took his hand. His fingers intertwined with mine, strong and reassuring. This man loved me when I had nothing. He remembers the woman I was before I was worn down by years of your selfishness. He sees value in me that goes beyond what I can provide financially. "But I love you too," Quincy said desperately. "You're my mother. I've always loved you. No, you loved what I could do for you. The money I provided, the problems I solved, the sacrifices I made so your life would be easier. But me, the person I am, you never saw me at all." Rashid's assistant knocked and entered, carrying a folder. He whispered something in Arabic to Rashid, who nodded grimly. "What is it?" I asked. "The final details about their financial situation," Rashid said, opening the folder. "It's worse than we thought. The hotel bill is nearly $12,000. They have maximum debt on 3 credit cards, all in your name, Gretchen, the cards they've been using since arriving in Dubai." My blood ran cold. "They opened credit cards in my name?" "Using your personal information, your social security number, your address. The applications were submitted online 2 weeks before your trip." I stared at Quincy in horror. This hadn't been a spontaneous betrayal. They'd planned this for weeks, maybe months. The loving son routine, the insistence on this expensive vacation, the way they'd convinced me to hand over my credit card, it had all been calculated. "You planned this," I whispered. "This whole trip was a setup." Quincy's face crumpled. "Mom, let me explain." "Explain what? How you committed identity theft? How you premeditated abandoning your elderly mother in a foreign country? We needed money," he burst out. "Do you have any idea how expensive everything is? The house payments, Elaine's medical school loans, the car payments. We're drowning, and you were just sitting on that nest egg doing nothing with it. That nest egg was my retirement fund. The money I saved working double shifts for 30 years so I wouldn't be a burden on anyone in my old age. But you were going to leave it to me anyway," he said, as if that justified everything. "We just needed it sooner." The casual entitlement in his voice was breathtaking. He genuinely believed he had a right to my money, my security, my future. "You were never going to inherit anything," I said quietly. "I changed my will 6 months ago." His face went white. "What?" "I left everything to charity, to organizations that help single mothers, actually. I saw too much of myself in them. Women struggling alone while the fathers of their children disappeared." Elaine made a choking sound. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious. The only thing you were going to inherit was my love and my respect. But you threw that away for a few $1,000s in credit card fraud." Quincy slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. For the first time since this confrontation began, he seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he'd lost. "We can fix this," he said desperately. "I'll pay back every penny. We'll get counseling, work on our relationship. Please, Mom, don't throw away 33 years over one mistake." "One mistake?" I repeated incredulously. "Quincy, you've been taking advantage of me for years. Every time you needed money for a new business venture that failed, every time Elaine wanted something expensive and you came crying to me about your financial problems, every time you made me feel guilty for not doing more, giving more, sacrificing more." I stood up, feeling suddenly exhausted by the weight of all those years of manipulation and guilt. "The only mistake I made was enabling you for so long. But that ends today." Rashid stood beside me, his presence a reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. "I think this meeting is over," he said firmly. "Ms. Patterson has made her position clear." "Wait," Elaine said, panic creeping into her voice. "What about our hotel bill? What about getting home? You can't just leave us stranded here." I looked at her, This woman who'd helped orchestrate my abandonment, who'd smiled while they stole from me, who was now demanding I rescue them from the consequences of their own actions. Why not? I asked. You left me stranded. You figured I'd find a way to survive, didn't you? Well, now it's your turn. But we don't speak Arabic, she whined. We don't know anyone here. We don't have any money. Then you'll learn what I learned 3 days ago. What it feels like to be helpless and alone in a foreign country, wondering if anyone cares whether you live or die. Quincy tried one last desperate appeal. Mom, I know you're hurt, but you raised me better than this. You taught me about forgiveness, about second chances. I did teach you those things, I agreed. I also taught you about consequences, about treating people with respect, about basic human decency. Apparently, you chose to ignore those lessons. I picked up my purse and moved toward the door. Rashid followed, but I paused at the threshold. The money you raised with your fake campaign about finding me? Donate it to charity. If you keep 1 penny of it, I'll have Rashid's lawyers pursue fraud charges against you in both countries. And the credit cards? Rashid added. We'll be contacting the banks this afternoon to report the identity theft. I suggest you find a way to pay those balances before the authorities get involved. As we left the room, I could hear Eleni crying and Quincy pleading with her to stay calm. Their voices faded as we walked down the elegant hotel corridor, and with each step, I felt lighter. How do you feel? Rashid asked as we reached his car. I considered the question seriously. How did I feel? Free, relieved, sad for the relationship that could have been but never was. And underneath it all, a deep sense of rightness, as if I'd finally stepped off a path that was never meant for me, and onto one that led toward happiness. I feel like I can breathe again, I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. He squeezed my hand as his driver opened the car door. Then we made the right choice. As we drove away from the hotel, I didn't look back. Quincy and Eleni would figure out their problems, or they wouldn't. Either way, it was no longer my responsibility. For the first time in my adult life, my only responsibility was to myself. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of what was now our home, watching the sun set over the Persian Gulf. The wedding ring on my finger caught the golden light, still new enough to surprise me when I caught sight of it. Mrs. Gretchen Al-Mansouri. Even after all this time, it felt like a beautiful dream. Rashid found me there, as he did most evenings, slipping his arms around me from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asked softly. Everything, I said, leaning back against his warmth. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on a bench, convinced my life was over. Now you're exactly where you belong, he finished, where you always belonged. The transformation had been gradual but profound. Rashid had been true to his word about giving me space to adjust, never pushing, always patient. Our courtship had been a revelation. Flowers appeared on my breakfast tray, not because I expected them, but because he remembered I'd once mentioned loving jasmine. Books materialized in my room, carefully chosen based on casual comments I'd made about my interests. He listened to everything I said as if my words were precious gems. The wedding had been small but elegant, held in his private garden with only a few close friends and family members present. I'd worn a dress the color of champagne, and Rashid had cried when he saw me walking toward him. 50 years old when we first met, he'd told me later, and he'd never cried at a wedding until his own. We'd honeymooned in Morocco, staying in a riad in Marrakesh where Rashid showed me the Medina and taught me to bargain for spices and silks. For the first time in my life, I had a partner who wanted to share experiences with me, not someone who expected me to finance and organize everything while they enjoyed the benefits. Any word from... He started to ask, then stopped himself. From Quincy? I finished. You can say his name, Rashid. It doesn't hurt anymore. There had been word, actually. Quite a bit of it, though I hadn't shared all the details with Rashid. Quincy and Eleni had eventually made it back to the United States, though not without consequences. The identity theft charges had followed them home, resulting in legal fees they couldn't afford and credit problems that would follow them for years. The house they'd been struggling to pay for had gone into foreclosure. Eleni had dropped out of medical school when they could no longer afford the tuition. Last I'd heard through mutual acquaintances, they were living in a small apartment and both working retail jobs. Quincy had written me several letters, each one more desperate than the last. The first had been full of righteous anger, accusing me of abandoning my family for money and status. The second had attempted manipulation, describing their hardships and begging me to remember my maternal duties. The third had been different, quieter, acknowledging some of what he'd done wrong while still making excuses. I'd read them all, felt the familiar tug of guilt and responsibility, and then filed them away unanswered. That part of my life was over. I heard from Gladys yesterday, I told Rashid, referring to my former neighbor back home. She said Quincy came by the house asking if I'd left any forwarding information. And? She told him what I asked her to tell him, that I was happy and safe, and that he should focus on his own life instead of mine. Rashid nodded approvingly. He'd never tried to influence my decisions about Quincy, but I knew he struggled with anger toward my son. The protective instincts I'd seen glimpses of during his student days had developed into something fierce over the years. I have something to tell you, I said, turning in his arms to face him. I've made a decision about the clinic. For months, Rashid had been encouraging me to consider working at the new women's health clinic he was building. Not because we needed the money, but because he'd seen how much I missed nursing, missed the sense of purpose that came from helping people. I want to do it, I said, but not as an employee, as a partner. His eyebrows rose. A partner? I want to use my retirement fund to invest in it. Make it a joint venture between us. I have ideas about how to structure the services, ways to reach women who might not otherwise seek care. Gretchen, you don't need to invest your own money. I have more than enough to fund the entire project. I know, but I want to contribute something that's mine. For 40 years, I defined myself by what I could do for other people. Now I want to build something because I choose to, because it matters to me, not because someone else needs me to. He studied my face carefully. Are you sure? Once that money is invested, it's not your safety net anymore. I smiled, thinking of how different this conversation was from any I'd ever had with Quincy. Rashid wanted to make sure I was making the right choice for me, not trying to convince me to give him access to my resources. You're my safety net now, I said simply. You and this life we're building together. The money is just money. I'd rather use it to do something meaningful than let it sit in an account gathering dust. He kissed me then, soft and sweet, tasting of the mint tea we'd shared after dinner. When we broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I love you, he said, not just for who you were 40 years ago, but for who you've become. For your strength, your compassion, your ability to start over when others would have given up. I love you too, I said. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. That night, as we sat in our study going over the clinic plans, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. It was from Quincy. I saw the announcement about your clinic in the International Herald Tribune. I'm proud of you, Mom. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message for a long time, waiting for the familiar guilt and sadness to wash over me. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected, a kind of peaceful closure. I showed the message to Rashid. What do you think? I think he's learning to accept reality, he said carefully. The question is, how do you feel about it? I considered for a moment, then typed back a simple response. Thank you. I am happy. I didn't add anything about missing him, or hoping he was well, or suggesting we reconnect. Those would have been lies disguised as kindness. Instead, I offered him the truth. I was happy, happier than I'd been in decades. After I sent the message, I turned off my phone and returned to the clinic plans. We worked until nearly midnight, designing treatment rooms and discussing staffing needs, building something meaningful together. 3 years later, the Gretchen Al-Mansouri Women's Health Center had become one of the most respected medical facilities in the region. We treated everyone regardless of their ability to pay, from expatriate wives struggling with depression to local women seeking reproductive health services. I'd found my calling again, but this time on my own terms. No more exhausting night shifts, No more choosing between work and rest. I set my own schedule, chose my own patience, and had a husband who supported every decision I made. On quiet days, I sometimes thought about alternate realities. What if I'd been braver 40 years ago? What if I'd told Rashid how I felt before he left Chicago? What if I'd recognized Quincy's selfishness earlier and set boundaries when he was young enough to learn from them? But those thoughts no longer brought pain. Everything I'd experienced, every sacrifice I'd made, every heartbreak I'd endured, had led me here. To this life, this love, this sense of completion I'd never imagined possible. Sometimes, the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst betrayals. Quincy's cruelty had set me free to discover what real love looked like. His abandonment had led me back to the one person who'd never stopped believing I was worth cherishing. I was 66 years old when my life truly began. It's never too late to choose happiness over obligation, love over duty, yourself over everyone else's expectations. On my 67th birthday, Rashid surprised me with a small ceremony at the clinic. He'd had a plaque made for the entrance, one that brought tears to my eyes, dedicated to women everywhere who found the courage to start over. As I read those words, I thought about the woman I'd been just a year before, exhausted, used, convinced my best years were behind me. She never could have imagined that her darkest moment would become the doorway to her greatest joy. The sun was setting over Dubai, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Rashid took my hand as we stood in front of our clinic, our dream made manifest. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. I thought about Quincy, probably sitting in his small apartment somewhere, still wondering how his foolproof plan had backfired so spectacularly. I thought about all the years I'd wasted feeling guilty for wanting something more than martyrdom. "Only one," I said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to realize I deserved to be happy." He squeezed my hand, and we walked home together through the cooling desert air. Two people who'd found their way back to each other after 40 years of searching. Sometimes love waits. Sometimes it's worth the wait. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.